Mike, still talking about the Patterson-Gimlin film. Wasn't there some people in Hollywood that claimed it was a suit and it was all made up?
Yeah, there was a rumor that went around Hollywood back. I think the rumor started with John Landis. He made a movie called Schlock, and he worked with Rick Baker, and there was an ape-like being in that film. And back in the late 60s, around the time that the Patterson-Gimlin film was made, there was a man in Hollywood named Chambers who was considered Mr. Monster Maker. He was the head ape guy. He was considered the epitome of the special effects artists at that time. He was the man who designed the Planet of the Apes costumes for the first Planet of the Apes movie. You know, the one with Roddy McDowell and that silly mask, you know, talking with the rubber mask on. That was the state of his art. And so there was a rumor started by Landis that he had actually made the costume for the Patterson-Gimlin film, and that you know, he had sworn to secrecy. And they used to, people in the industry used to come up to him and say, "Hey, John, come on, you can tell me. You made that suit, didn't you?" And he at first would deny it, but then after a while he decided that, well, I'm not going to deny it anymore. I'm just not going to admit it, because he didn't do it. And so he even admitted to a researcher who asked him about it in his later years, and he said, "Well, I stopped denying it, and it was actually pretty good for business, because my own peers, you know, had put me up on a pillar as the best, and how I had made that suit, and so forth." So that was one of the that was the source of that rumor. And I myself saw a special effects guy being interviewed one time, and they asked him, "Well, what do you think about the Patterson film?" Now, this guy was about 20 years old. He, you know, he wasn't around when the Patterson film was shot. He wasn't around when movies back in the 60s had really silly-looking gorillas in them and so forth, and when costumes were pretty bad. He'd only been around since about 1980, when they started making much more sophisticated costumes in the movies. There was a movie called American Werewolf in London, where you actually saw the werewolf go through the transition and do the shape-shifting. You saw its nose grow, and its arms become hairy, and all that. And that's because they were using mechanical devices with puppeteers off camera, operating these little push and pull devices with pneumatics and so forth that would cause the effect of the jaw growing and stuff. It's all done with mechanical devices, and they used those on the close-ups, and then they would shoot establishing shots where you saw a guy in a suit. Harry and the Hendersons, which was made in 20 years after the Patterson-Gimlin film was shot, the costume in that film won an Academy Award for the best makeup, best costume for that year. And in that one, that was the first time they actually started using wireless technology to operate these little puppets. And so instead of have to use them only on close-ups, where they could have somebody right off camera with this wire attached, now they could have some of the mechanical devices actually built into a mask that you could put on your head, and they could shoot a long shot that also included some puppetry to operate the musculature in these mechanics. And that's why that costume did so well, and why he won an award. The other thing is that the costume for Harry and the Hendersons cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to make, and they actually hired little old ladies to sew human hairs by hand, one of a time, into the costume, because that's the only way you can make the hair really look realistic. When you take a bolt of nylon fake fur and you cut it up and you make it into a suit, well, it just doesn't look that realistic. And so most of the costumes that were made back in the 60s, that's how they were made, and they looked really bad. So the only way that Patterson and Gimlin could have done what they did, and what they did is actually film a real creature that looks so realistic that even to this day, if you put that up against Harry and the Hendersons, for example, and you put them side by side, which I've done, you can still see that the Patterson film looks a hell of a lot more like some kind of an athletic being with musculature and so forth than does that sophisticated costume made by Rick Baker.